Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, normally on the show, what I do is I'll read one single question and then we'll spend the entire episode on that. Well, the problem is we get tons of comments and questions through askmark@adorama.com, as well as YouTube comments and Twitter comments and Facebook. And so a lot of the comments that we get and questions, well, they don't require an entire episode to answer. And so in this episode, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of answering just one question, we're going to tackle 12 questions, and we're going to do that sort of in rapid fire succession. So let's start with the very first question, and this one comes from episode 33, talking about histograms. And the question is, you said you were shooting in black and white mode on the 7D. Well, how do you do that? Well, I've got a 7D here, and this is the exact same camera that I used in episode 33, and I'll show you exactly how we set it up to black and white mode. It's pretty simple. On the back of the camera here, and I've got this hooked up, by the way, to the big screen so you can see. On the back of the camera here, there's a little button that looks sort of like a ceiling fan, and when you push that, what you'll get is this menu option where you can set the picture style on a Canon 7D, and then you can just sort of roll the dial and choose if it's neutral, landscape, or portrait, or monochrome, and you can actually dial these in where they're a little bit different. So most cameras have something that's either called picture style if you're a Canon shooter, or something similar to that where you can go into the menu and choose a different photo style, and then that way you'll shoot in black and white. So we've got that. Now the other thing is, I'll just show you on a Nikon here just to show you that this is very consistent across different camera brands. Now I've got a Nikon here. This guy is the D90, and I'll go into the menu here. And you'll see under the shooting menu and the left, this little camera, the very first thing is to set the picture control. I can push my button and go right in there. And you'll see I've got standard, vivid, monochrome, etc. So I can get right in there from my Nikon as well. The other thing you can do is on the back of a Nikon, there's this info button. And so when I'm just in my normal shooting mode, if I hit the info button, what will happen is some information will pop up. Usually this is on the back of the screen. If I push that one more time, you can see that now I can move my dials to choose active D-lighting or set the picture control or do some function button things. So that's where you get that. I just hit that and go right into picture control. So using this little info button twice is a shortcut on a Nikon to get into setting those picture control, so you can choose black and white. So that's how you do it on a Canon or a Nikon. Some cameras are going to be a little bit different than that, so make sure you check your user manual, but usually it's set in the menu itself to make sure you have that all set up. All right, so another question is it possible to change the exposure compensation without changing the shutter speed? This comes from episode 16 when I was talking about exposure. Well, absolutely. So right here I've got, again, my Canon. And what I've done is I've set this to shutter priority mode, and that's the key. If you want to make sure that the shutter speed stays constant and then you want to compensate over or underexpose, then you put it on shutter priority mode. And then when you roll your exposure compensation dial, what's going to happen, and you can see this down here on the lower left, that's our exposure, either under or over, and you can see that it's the aperture that's changing, not the shutter speed. So if you want to use exposure compensation to make the aperture change, put it in shutter priority mode. If you want to have exposure compensation to make the shutter speed change, then put it in aperture priority mode, and that's how that works. All right, so there's another question here. Mark, I've been watching your series on light metering, and maybe I've missed it, but you mentioned that you were going to explain why I would use dome out versus dome in on the Seikonic L358 meter. Now, this is the 358 meter that we're talking about here. And normally when you're metering, this little dome, it's actually called the lumisphere, you would have that out or up. And so you can twist this dial and the lumisphere will be retracted. So normally when you're shooting a metering light, you want to have the dome out or the lumisphere out because it's metering all the light from all the different sources in 180 degrees. So it's the light source, it's light bouncing off of things, it's light as we see it in real life in 3 dimensions. And so normally you're going to have the lumisphere up. Well, you put the lumisphere down if you're metering light on something that's flat, like a piece of art, or more specifically, if you're trying to figure out different light sources. For example, your key light, you want to see how much light is coming from that. You can put this down, and it's only metering the light that's coming straight in. It's ignoring light that's coming from the sides or bouncing. And then maybe you can look at your fill and see how much light you're getting there. And so the lumisphere down is going to help you really isolate light sources and make sure your light ratios are set. And then normally you put your lumisphere back up and average all of the light. Now for more information about that, we go into more detail in episodes 25 through 28. It's a 4-part series on metering. Another person wrote in, this person said it would be great if you made a DVD or a DVD series about photography. Well, I've already done that. It's called Studio Lighting Essentials for Portrait Photography. You can get it at adorama.com, and so there you have it. There is a DVD out there. All right, another one said, I love your fluffy mic. And that's actually from episode 27, all about metering part 3, using a meter. Well, what they were talking about is I was outside and there was one of these little fluffy things on my microphone. And what these are wind screens. And so when you're outside shooting in the wind, and if you have a lavalier mic like I normally wear, well, you get a lot of wind noise. It's just, and it's really, really noisy. So what we do is we pick one of these that matches the shirt I happen to be wearing, and that will eliminate all of that wind noise. So this is just a wind screen, and it's not actually the microphone. It's just this little thing that goes onto the microphone. All right, well, in episode 26, it's metering part 2. In this episode, I actually was talking about how your camera averages light. And to do that, I had an example where I shot a black wall and then I shot a white wall and showed you that both of them turned out gray. So this person wrote in and said, hey, I'm using a Canon 5D Mark II and I can't get the camera to autofocus on a black wall to try out this project. Is there a way to get it to focus without using the infrared autofocus assist beam of a speed light flash? Well, absolutely. When you're having focusing issues with something like that, the reason that your camera is not focusing is that it's looking at something that has zero contrast. It's the same luminosity, the same brightness from side to side, and there's no edges. So the camera has nothing to grab onto to focus. And so your camera is just never going to focus on something that is a solid black or a solid gray or white or any color. So to make sure that your camera focuses, you've got a couple of choices. One, you can put your camera in manual focus and just manually focus your camera. Or if you can find the edge of that wall, then use your autofocus point, and then you would put that autofocus point on the edge, focus, and then recompose the shot, and you'll do just fine. All right, so another one. I just downloaded the demo version of Lightroom and have a question. If I import the files from my card reader using Lightroom and then edit them, does Lightroom save an unedited copy of the file somewhere for me? Or have I irreversibly altered that file that I just imported? This is specifically having to do with episode 38 when I talked about post-processing. Well, no, your file that you imported into Lightroom actually doesn't ever change because Lightroom uses something called non-destructive editing. And so no matter what you do to the photo, you can always go back to the original because it's not actually changing the photo itself like Photoshop does. What it's doing is it's actually making changes based on metadata. So the only time that you're going to create a file that is actually physically different is when you export that file using the export dialog. Anything up into that, when you're in the develop module, you can look on the left-hand side. At the lower left, there is a history, and you can always undo and go all the way back to when you imported the file, and so you'll be just fine. All right, another question. I'm interested to know how I can get my PNG logo into each photo of my library. Again, they're talking about Lightroom, and this comes from episode 38, Post-Processing Part 2. Well, the easiest way for me to answer that question is just to show you how to do it. It's very simple, so let me show you how to do that in Lightroom. All right, well, it's really easy in Lightroom to create a watermark out of a graphic. Now, the first step is to make sure that you have a transparent PNG file, and I have one, an old logo for Mark Wallace Photography, and so that's the one I'm going to be using, and it is in this Mark Wallace logo folder. So I'll zip over here to my Lightroom catalog, and I've got some images that I created for a different episode of Digital Photography 101. I want to export these, but I want to make sure that there's a watermark on all of these files. So it's pretty simple. I'll just go in here and I'm going to select all these files. And then what I'll do is I'm going to go here, make sure these are all selected first of all. I'll go into the export menu. So File, Export. Now you can choose any of the normal things that you would choose for an export setting, put it into a specific folder, renaming it, I'm not going to rename it, setting it to specific file settings, etc. So I have this all sort of set up for a normal small JPEG export. Now the key is this little watermarking dialog right here. So I'm going to click watermark, and then I'm going to click edit watermarks to set this up for the very first time. Now right now it's got a watermark that I created earlier for a different project, but I want to create something brand new. So I have a choice. I can either make this text, and I can type in copyright Mark Wallace or whatever you would want, or I can make this a graphic, and that's really what we want to do. So the first thing is to choose the image. So you can choose a PNG or a JPEG image. I'm going to choose the PNG file because I like it. And then here is my Mark Wallace logo PNG file. So I've already navigated to that folder. I'll say choose, and then you can see here it is right here in this lower corner. Now the next thing I want to do is select the opacity, so that's how transparent it is. I want it to be nice and punchy, so I'm going to leave it at 100%, but you can make this semi-transparent by taking the opacity down. And then you can make this proportional. So depending on the size of your files, it could be 1,000 pixels or 5,000 pixels or 20, it doesn't matter. This will always take up a certain amount of space. Or you can say just fit it left to right every time, or fill it. So I'm going to say make it proportional, and I want it to be about this big. And then I can make this inset a little bit to the left and then vertically, so it's not right at the edges, it's sort of inset a little bit. And then you can anchor this to the top left, right, or the middle, stick it right in the center of your, so wherever you want to anchor that, it'll work. And so if these are vertical or horizontal pictures, this is going to scale and anchor at every single one of those, so you'll get the perfect settings every single time, and it'll be all automated. You can even rotate that graphic so it's vertical, upside down, horizontal, whatever. So once you have everything set up, you'll go down here and you say save current settings as a new preset. And I'm going to name this Mark Wallace logo. And then once I create that, I'll say done. Now in the future, if I want to add a watermark that has that logo, I just click the drop down list here, and I've got one for my Studio Lighting Essentials DVD or the Mark Wallace logo. I'll leave it to that, and then I'm going to say export. Now what's going to happen is it's going to go grab all these images, it's going to export those as JPEG files, and every single one of those is going to have my logo on it, and so then it's ready to go out to the web or wherever you want to send it. You can even automate this, so on the left hand side, these publishing services, Facebook, Flickr, SmugMug, etc., it will automatically watermark and send those out, and so you don't have to worry so much about watermarking. It's just sort of built in. So when I preview these, you can see that all of them have the watermark built right in, and it's just that easy. On episode 20 on Location Flash, we saw this really interesting comment, and I really liked it. So somebody started quoting me. They said, click, and then I didn't turn on my Pocket Wizard. Laugh out loud. Okay, so what was happening there is I made a mistake in one of the videos, and somebody thought it was really funny. And we think it's funny too here at the studio. And the cool thing about that comment is it brings something to light. And that is most of the mistakes that I make in the videos, we edit those out. And I wish that we had enough time to leave the mistakes in, actually, because a lot of the learning that I find from my own personal photography and learning video and lighting and all that kind of stuff, it really doesn't come from the successes, it comes from the failures. And so we have a sort of a motto here that we stole from Mythbusters, actually, and Sir Ken Robinson, who is an educator and talks about education, and that is fail early, fail often, and fail with purpose. And so we really want to try to push ourselves until we fail at something, not meaning that we're just incompetent, but meaning that we're working as hard as we possibly can to try new things, to learn new things. And if we never fail, that means that we're not trying hard enough. And so I don't mind when I make mistakes. I think it's a good, very, very healthy thing. And I encourage everybody that watches this show to make mistakes for themselves and to fail early, fail often, and fail with purpose, because it will change how you live your life. It's really liberating. So thanks for pointing that out. We really like our failures. Okay, so here's another question. Can you tell me, how is the reflective metering in your Sekonic meter different than the TTL metering of your camera? Are they equally precise? Now granted, your EV meter cannot compute, your TTL meter cannot compute EV ratios. Well, actually, that's not entirely the case. Well, first let me talk about the differences, and then we'll talk about the similarities. So what they're talking about, and it came from episode 28, metering part 4, some advanced metering. They're talking about the Sekonic L758 And this has a spot meter that I can actually look through and meter different portions of a scene, and that's either in the studio or on location. Now, are they equally precise? Absolutely not. So on the Seiconic meter, it's got an angle of view of 1%. In other words, there's like a little cone coming out, and it's only growing by 1% over a great distance. So if you want to be really precise over a distance, a 1% growth is really narrow. As opposed to the TTL spot meter on some cameras, what's happening is it's totally dependent on the lens that you're using and the type of camera you have. So a D90 is different than a D7000, is different than a D3S, and different from a D3X, and the same is true of a Canon. A 1DS Mark II is different from 1DS Mark IV, 1D, etc. So they're all different, so you're going to get inconsistent results, and they depend on the lens that's used. And so the angle of view ranges from about 2% to 5, even up to 12%. And the other thing that's happening is based on how you have your camera pointing, well, the light that comes into the lens is going to refract and bounce off the lens elements inside the lens. And so that's also going to change the metering. And so this is not nearly as precise as a meter like the 758 that's got this built-in dedicated spot meter. So they're not as precise. The other thing, though, that is important to note is if you're using spot metering for the zone system on some cameras like the D-series Canon cameras, you can actually take different EV values and average and find out where the hot spots and dark spots, and there are different points on the scale. So normally those are in the high-end professional cameras where you can do that. So you do have some of that EV ratio functionality in some of the high-end professional cameras, just like you do in a meter, and so there are some similarities there. All right, another question. Is it okay to use 2 softboxes as my key and fill light, or should I stick to having a softbox for my key and an umbrella for my fill? This comes from episode 23, the basic 3-light setup. Well, yeah, absolutely. The thing is, you can use anything you want for a fill light and a key light. You can use softboxes, you can use beauty dishes, you can use walls, you can use normal reflectors, you can use bare lamps, anything. So experiment with whatever you want. There is no set answer to that. In fact, I think in a couple of videos, several videos in fact, I show some light setups where I'm using 2 softboxes as a key and a fill. I think episode 28 on advanced metering, we use 2 4x6 softboxes. And in some of my other videos and in my DVD, we use all kinds of different light shaping tools. So it's not just always a softbox and umbrella. You can totally mix and match and do all kinds of things. Let your imagination run wild. Remember, this is art. There are no specific rules. You need to know the rules, and then you can bend those and break those to make art that confines to your vision of what art should be. All right, the next question. I'm taking a trip to Ecuador. I have a Canon 7D and only room to bring 1 or 2 lenses at most. What would you recommend for fast-paced travel photography? Well, this is a no-brainer for me. And the answer to that question is a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. I've got one for my Nikon camera and I've got one for my Canon camera. And in both hands, I love the 24 to 70 lens. And the reason for that is at the 24 millimeter side of the lens, you've got plenty of room to shoot scenic photography, like architectural stuff, cityscapes, and just document all the stuff you'd need a wide-angle lens for. And at the 70 millimeter side of the lens, well, you've got all the stuff that you need to get some great portrait photography, street photography, shooting locals. And so when I've been in India and traveled overseas in Asia and Europe, almost every single shot from those trips was taken with a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. I have taken my 70 to 200 on a lot of trips and find that it's just so long, I don't use it, and it's really heavy. And so if you only have one lens, hands down, 24 to 70 is the way to go. All right, well, that's our last question for this episode. Remember, if you like this style of sort of rapid fire question and answer, let us know, and if so, we'll do more of these. And if you don't, let us know, and we'll just stick to the one question format that we have done over the last few years. Well, thank you so much for watching this week. Remember, send in your questions. If you have a question for me, you can send it to me at askmark@adorama.com. And if we like the question and we think it's useful, we might just use it on this show. Well, thanks for joining me. I'll see you again next week.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.